Captain Peter Cutzy in South Korea, and this is my briefing room. Welcome. We're going to cover the engine severe damage checklist and actions. The checklist we'll have a look at first, which we've seen already when we did the engine fire portion of the checklist. We're now going to do the engine severe damage portion. The condition, one or more of these occur, engine fire warning, not the case. Airframe vibrations with abnormal engine indications, that is the case. So the auto throttle if engaged, disengage. Thrust lever for the affected engine, confirm, close. Engine start lever for the affected engine, confirm, cut off. Engine fire switch for the affected engine, confirm, pull. And if you notice here, we're going to have to manually unlock the fire switch. Because remember from your CBT, the fire switch being illuminated actually allows the fire switch to be pulled. That's the trigger for it. But being that the fire switch lights are not illuminated, you have to manually select the release underneath the fire switch with one hand and pull the fire switch with the other hand. And once you've done that, that's the end. It's the first four items are the memory actions for the severe damage. Well, let's go and have a look at a PowerPoint that I've done. Incidentally, this PowerPoint is available in the package in Google Drive. The objective is to identify the malfunction. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, N1 is 0. The GT has an engine fail message. N2, a lower indication, considerably lower than engine number 1. Fuel flow, a lower indication as compared to number 1. Oil pressure, 0. Oil temperature, a lower indication and cooling. Oil quantity, no apparent change. And vibration, 0. So that's the objective, is to be able to identify and then also take the correct actions. So the appropriate actions here, pilot flying, fly the airplane. Pilot monitoring will cancel the warning lights. And when the airplane is under control, the gear has been retracted and a safe altitude has been attained at minimum 400 feet, then you'll get into identifying. So here is basically a look at the red sector. Remember in my previous briefing, we have a red sector, an amber sector, a green sector, and a blue sector. The red is from field elevation to 400 feet. That's the one we're talking about now. So fly the aircraft, cancel the bell. If there was a bell, in this case, there wasn't. And use rudder inputs to keep the aircraft straight. If you, it says here, and this is directly from the FCTM, and that's the way it works, recommended control wheel is approximately level. And the slide skip slip indicator rudder as required for your slip skid indicator. So as long as you keep the slip skid lined up with the pointer, you will fly the airplane correctly. Rotate it 1.5 to 2.5 degrees per second, because remember, in this case, you have an engine out. It's not the same as an engine fire. The engine fire, you've got both engines operating. So you rotate at 1.5 to 2.5 degrees per second to 12.5 degrees of pitch, 12 to 13 degrees. Then follow the command bars. Track the extended center line. Use rudder trim when under control. Engage in autopilot when trimmed and comfortable. Technique, as I mentioned before, engine 1, engage autopilot B, engine 2, engage autopilot A. All right, so here it is broken down into who does what. Pilot flying flies the airplane, rotate normally. And the pilot monitoring, I suggest use the terminology engine malfunction. Of course, you're not going to give the number of the engine so that you don't give the wrong information in case you make a mistake as pilot monitoring. And you don't really know what the problem was, really. So rather than rush into something and give the pilot flying the wrong information, call it an engine malfunction. She or he knows, the pilot flying knows that you've obviously lost an engine because of the yaw and what was required to keep it straight. But you want to say minimum. Monitor the pilot flying. Pilot flying will use the command bars once attaining the 12.5 degrees of pitch. And then the pilot monitoring will verify positive rate of climb on the baro altimeter. Remember, baro altimeter, calling positive rate. Pilot flying will ensure that she or he has a positive rate before calling gear up. All right. So on that command, the pilot monitoring will place the landing gear lever to the up position. When all the lights are extinguished, place the landing gear lever off. That's on the NG only. Track the extended center line on the nav display. Here we are here tracking the center line as we mentioned in the engine fire checklist. And also a little picture of what your pitch would look like. Here we are at 12.5 degrees of pitch. So that's what your target is. Until you attain that target, then you'll fly the command bars, which will command you properly at V2 to V2 plus 20 with an engine out. Just reviewing quickly the tracking of the extended center line. Remember, the solid white line on your nav display is your IRS generated track. The white dash line is your FMC generated runway extended center line of 14.2 nautical miles. If your map is correct, which you would have checked on the runway when you touched toga, you can use it. So when you're airborne, if you overlie the track line over the dashed white line, you'll track the runway center line. A great tool with an engine out and a great tool for your raw data ILS. All right, let's continue. So we're now approaching or into the second level or cake level, and I call it the amber zone. And fly the aircraft, and the call basically is the heading select, identify. All right. We'll go and have a look at the next slide, because if your procedures call for a turn between 400 and 800 feet, as per your company SOPs, then do that, but your call is still the same, heading select and identify, but it will include other things. So heading select, set bank limit 15 degrees, open the speed window, identify. So 2 extra items. Now, if your company's SOPs state that you will always set bank limit to 15, then you follow your company SOPs. That's important. All right. So here we go. We're in the identify section now. 1 or more of these occur. Engine fire warning, not the case. Airframe vibrations with abnormal engine indications, that is the case. We have abnormal engine indications, definitely. So you identify it, pilot monitoring, and you call it. When the pilot flying called identify, pilot monitoring confirms all of this and gives the correct information. Engine number 2, severe damage. Okay. Pilot flying is at 400 feet. He called, as I mentioned before, for heading cell and identify the grayed out as required. And the pilot monitoring will actually identify, as I mentioned on that slide you saw just before, engine 1 severe damage. Okay. And if it comes out as engine severe damage number 1 or engine number 1 severe damage, as long as you get the words to identify it correctly, and the pilot flying understands, that's fine. Follow your company SOPs. So pilot flying, disengage the auto throttle, and with the hand on thrust lever, engine number 1 thrust lever, confirm. And pilot monitoring after confirming engine number 1, confirm number 1. Pilot flying engine number 1 thrust lever will recharge slowly until the thrust lever is closed. Pilot monitoring, monitor to make sure that the pilot flying is doing the correct thing. Now the pilot monitoring places her or his hand on the number 1 engine start lever and says, engine number 1 start lever. Pilot flying confirms the selection is correct and says, confirm number 1. Pilot monitoring selects the respective start lever to cut off, and as the person is placing it to cut off, says, cut off. Follow your company SOPs on what's to be said. Pilot monitoring places her or his hand on number 1 engine fire switch and says, engine number 1 fire switch. Pilot flying confirms the selection of the is correct and says, confirm number 1. A note here I've added, make sure you place your hand under the fire switch to make sure that the pilot flying actually can see that's the one you're selecting before grasping it. And of course, when you do grasp it, you're going to have to put your other hand underneath and push the release to pull. Because remember, as I said before, that the engine fire lights being illuminated, or the fire switch lights, I should say, being illuminated will automatically allow you, or will allow you to actually pull, meaning the release is released with the lights in the handle or in the fire switch. So in this case, there are no lights illuminated, therefore that's why you have to use the switch release underneath. The pilot monitoring selects the respective fire switch release under the fire switch and then says pull and pull. All right, so that's the end of the memory items. And meanwhile, the pilot flying is moving up into the green zone. And in the green zone, that's 800 feet above field elevation. I call it the green zone because it's a good way to remember these layers: red, amber, green, and blue. Track the extended center line. Ensure VNAV path is enunciated. Of course, if you're FMCU 10.7 or greater, it will be. And if not, for whatever reason, you've got to start accelerating at 800 feet. Open the speed window, and set flaps up speed. Set bug to flaps up speed, or whatever your company tells you. Use the correct wording in your SOPs. Clean up the aircraft, and once the flaps are up and the lights out, the call is level change MCT. And then if you're a VNAV airplane, you can go to VNAV when directed from your SOPs. All right. And here is exactly what we were just talking about broken down into pilot flying duties and pilot monitoring duties. All right. Now remember that, let's just go back. Remember that the pilot flying normally takes her or his own autopilot selection. That's a must. But if you have the autopilot engaged at this point, your company SOPs and Boeing recommend that the pilot flying make the mode control panel inputs. That's fine, but you may feel uncomfortable if you're struggling with the aircraft in order to keep it in a controlled fashion as far as rudder pedal inputs and track in the center line. If you don't feel comfortable with looking up to the MCP, don't look up to the MCP. Fly the airplane and ask the pilot monitoring to make the selections for you until you're comfortable. That is a suggestion, a technique, and it's called airmanship, by the way. And here's what we discussed before. When the flaps are up and the lights out, call level change and MCT. And pilot monitoring will select CON from the FMC CDU N1 page and make selections as required and contact ATC. Remember, you're still aviating here. Now you're going to go into a navigate portion. You want to stay over the airport if you can. You want to stay close to the airport. If I had a choice, I want to hold right over the airport. Whether there's a VOR or not, it doesn't matter. You got an FMC, use it. Hold in present position. This is an emergency, you have priority. The communication to the controlling agency will be Mayday or PAN, depending on what the captain asks you as a pilot monitoring to say. Mayday can always be downgraded to a PAN, and a PAN can always be upgraded to a Mayday. That's the captain's decision. When to say and when to talk is very important. Remember, the first thing is fly the airplane. When everything is settled down and comfortable and above 400 feet, if the pilot flying has everything wired and fully under control, the pilot monitoring can go ahead and make a very short transmission to tower to advise of the intentions, very short, and followed by, I'll get back to you shortly. They have to know, especially if you're going to break the SID and start a turn between 400 and 800 feet or whatever. Okay, use your head. If you can't come back and you've got to go en route, pilot flying could call for the engine out climb page and climb at the engine out speed to the engine out altitude. And of course, the pilot flying would ask the pilot monitoring to make this request with the controlling agency. It may be the departure, it may be whoever, but get things done in this sequence and you'll be safe. Pilot flying's job is to focus on flying the airplane. Pilot monitoring job is to be the pilot flying in a standby mode and do other things, as we've been talking about. You may have your engine out route as installed in your database by your company, and you will follow company procedures as far as selecting it from the FMC. It may be en route to whatever your engineering department has created for you. All right, so now you're navigating, and somewhere in here, you're going to go from the green zone to the blue zone, and the blue is cool. That's the way I think about it. In other words, you're safe there. Just remember to restore the bank limit selector to the auto position if you already selected 15 degrees of bank, because if you're on vectors or you want to turn using heading select, you'll only get 15 degrees of bank. So that's a trigger point. All right. So here we are. We're in the cool zone. Navigate, communicate, as we mentioned. And I just told you about that. And try to think of everything in the sequence I'm giving it to you. En route to the hold, you want to do a quick DODAR, which stands for diagnose whatever happened and your options and decision making, your actions and review. It's just a way to remember. So just do a mini one, and meaning that, did we do the right thing? We had a severe damage. Did we do the memory items? Yes, we did. Fine. You're going to review all of that later when you get in the hold. But this is just to ensure that you haven't really messed up somewhere. All right. Once the holding is set, and you could be en route to the holding pattern, you can call for the first checklist. That's when to do it. And if it's a very short space of time, wait until you get in the holding and establish. That's why if there are memory items, the memory items are done as soon as you're safe, above 400 feet. The checklist doesn't have to be done. It shouldn't be done until you're safely established in a hold or en route. Remember that, that's important. So complete the first non-normal checklist, then the after takeoff, and then add any other non-normal. And here's just a suggestion. Checklist to be completed. In this case, the engine fire or engine severe damage or separation checklist. And when you call for a checklist, you call for it by that name because that's how it's listed in the QRH paper copy and also mirrored in the iPad copy. The after takeoff checklist. Okay, it's not a non-normal, that's why it's green, but you've got to do it at this point. And then any other checklist that may need to be addressed, that may have cropped up because of something else. Then the last checklist, call for one engine and operative landing checklist down to deferred items. That's a suggestion because you want to stop at deferred items. Why do? Well, we know what deferred means. It means do these later. Later? Why later? Well, you have to set up the FMC for the approach, and pilot flying is going to do the approach briefing, then resume one engine and operative landing checklist at deferred items would be a call. Then the pilot monitoring will resume the deferred items, which are basically the descent checklist, approach checklist, and the landing checklist. Finished. As far as who does what with respect to setting up the FMC, follow your company SOPs. What do I prefer? If I'm going to be the pilot flying, I would prefer to give control to the pilot monitoring and give the radios to her or him. And I would read the approach with my partner following me through. Then I would resume control and of the aircraft and then call for the deferred items. That's what I would do. What you're going to do is what's in your standard operating procedures. That's important. All right. And here it is again, broken down with the duties. Communicate, use airmanship of what, when, and what to say. Very important. Okay, so this is the briefing. I hope you enjoyed it. It is in my package, if you subscribe to my package. And my next briefing will be the engine separation. My contact information is on screen. See you in the next briefing.